and NGOs always go back to the declaration in terms of what did you commit to make. And unfortunately, the past record of the G20 is not promising at all. For example, they've been talking about a strong, sustainable, balanced growth since 2008. They've been speaking about job creation, inclusive development, reform of global financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. They've been talking about mobilizing trillions for climate change and infrastructure. They've been speaking about closing the loopholes and tackling illicit cash outflows. And they've been talking about reducing inequality ever since.
Yeah, no, this is not the inequality is actually a big theme within the G20 space. So it does beg the question, and especially based on what you're saying, that the track record is bad for the most unequal country in the world. And now, given the fact that we have this report, and we'll go into some of the details of the report, what is going to be the pressure point that might lead us to actualizing some of these steps towards a more equal society, a more equal world, a more equal South Africa? Or are we going to be known as that country that, highlighted inequality in the most unequal country in the world and then allowed the world to just go on as if nothing happened the day?
Look, we have a long history of inequalities. We are emerging from a terrible history of apartheid colonialism. And one of the features of colonialism and apartheid was separate development that never equal. And so, yes, we inherited those inequalities from our ugly past. But unfortunately for President Ramaphosa, he's been a leader of a party under whose leadership those inequalities simply worsened. And I normally like this joke to say during the struggle, and we were joking that we are competing with Brazil, Argentina, and other South America's economy in terms of inequalities. Yeah. And suddenly, we can't compete with them in football, but we have outpaced them when it comes to income inequalities and general inequalities in society. We've become the most unequal society in the whole world, which is an indictment and on the ANC led by President Ramaphosa and Zuma, Mbeki, and Mandela. And that's what we've delivered in the first 31 years of democracy. More inequalities, more poverty, more unemployment, and unfortunately, even more corruption.
Mr. Vavi, you've been in the rooms in the last 31 years where these conversations were had, where unemployment, inequality, and poverty were said to be the triple challenges that South Africa had to face and had to confront and had to redress. And you've rightfully said, we have gotten worse when it comes to inequality. We've gotten worse when it comes to unemployment, particularly. Poverty, we've managed some pockets of success, but it's definitely not been at the level that is needed, and it's really been unequal, even in terms of the kind of successes that we've seen there. What responsibility do we have here in terms of not only the ANC, but in terms of social, economic elites, even within the union space, for the reputation that we now have, the democratic part of South Africa has produced more inequality? Given that we're competing here against the low bar of colonialism and apartheid, how is it that we have become more unequal in the last 31 years of democracy? And does it not give democracy a bad name if we have, discussions, come up with policies that have not brought the country to being equal, when that was one of the key things that from the beginning we knew we had to do?
One important aspect of Joseph Stiglitz's report is saying inequality is a matter of policy choices.
And what are the policy choices we've made or not made?
We've not made a policy choice of ensuring that there is a redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor. We didn't live up to the fundamental demand of the Freedom Charter that says the wealth of the country shall be shared. We didn't ensure that the land is redistributed. We didn't make sure that the education becomes dynamic and it is free, compulsory, and it is based on our local experiences. We didn't ensure that our health care can deliver healthy working class and living standards that can make us to live longer whilst being productive. And we didn't build houses and comfort for all as demanded in the Freedom Charter. We didn't do those things in an aggressive way. Instead of doing that, we got, in our view, in the trade union movement, we got a government that got captured by the elite and the powerful few who lead it to abandon those aspirations, that historical mission of the liberation movement in favor of privatization, austerity programs, slim state programs, and now austerity. And all of those things is what actually have led to a gap growing between the rich and the poor. So the 1% of the population became stinking rich, and the majority are trapped in poverty. You are right and wrong about pockets of success when it talks about poverty, but in the overall reality, if you look at the report that is produced by the University of Cape Town, they say 62% of the South Africa's population lives below the upper bound poverty level of 1,558 rands a whole month. Now that's a disaster. And if you keep so many people trapped in poverty, and 20 million of them are food, about 2.4 million are actually going hungry. And then you're playing with fire. And when we talk about South Africa risking an implosion, and that we are sitting on a powder keg, a ticking time bomb, we mean those levels of hunger, of deprivation, of hopelessness, of 10 million trapped in long-term unemployment, as the Q2 labor force survey showed this year. That's the levels of the hopelessness. And when we have those levels of hopelessness, few things are going to happen. Politically, people are going to start looking for who to blame. And unfortunately, there's groupings in South Africa who say, don't blame the source of where the crisis is coming from. Better divert your attention to migrants. So they're mobilizing around migrants. You're going to have big divisions in society as people are intensely competing another for meager resources that are diminishing.
Yeah.
As more people are being offloaded from the economy and into the informal sector, and they're going to be fighting for opportunities to be in the hair salon, to be in the shoemaking business, fixing bells in the streets and all of that. Then you're going to have levels of desperation that drives our young people to violence, to drugs, to making more babies and all of that. But then there's going to be a phenomenon of searching for the big messiah, one big man who can solve all of these problems much
And we're waiting for, or at least the conditions are ripe at this point for our own golden escalator you mentioned. But you frame a lot of what you've said in the last few minutes around the idea of people competing for scarcity. But let's just think about the policy choices that have led us here, not only from a local perspective, but your view on, South Africa comes into the 1994 moment off the back of the Washington Consensus and a number of, international reconfigurations of geopolitics that moves us into the direction of what we think of as kind of the neoliberal capitalist first kind of economy, right? And so a lot of people say that's the reason why we've made the kind of policy choices that we have. But I want you to take us into the 90s and the early 2000s. At the point that we're talking about RDP and gear, at the point that we're talking about privatization or state-led, how are we making those choices and back against Western and global-led agendas around the direction in which economies need to go? Because Stigler's report really actually says to us that 90s period was a period that was baking inequalities. It was incubating inequalities by the direction that we were going in, with less state intervention becoming the norm, with more privatization becoming the norm. We didn't have the buffer that the Europeans had, or even that the US had with the Marshall Plan and the New Deal, of having had that period of real kind of social investment before that neoliberal turn. Did we have any maneuvering room to push back against the neoliberal turn that was taken in the 90s? What were the negotiations and the discussions happening within the ANC, within government, and within the tripartite alliance that you were in at that time?
Well, the 1980s, 90s, a liberation movement in South Africa led by the ANC peace, they all left Azania, a socialist movement.
Yeah.
It's a socialist movement. Has never been a socialist movement, but it was definitely a left-leaning liberation movement whose demands are enshrined in the Freedom Charter itself, not a socialist program, but definitely a strongly social democratic policy framework.
Then how did we end up here?
Okay, I'm coming to that point. So there's no doubt about the fact that the masses of South Africa have been politicized around left-wing and left-leaning policy. The moment comes in the mid-1980s with two powerful leaders in the world, one from the United States called Ronald Reagan, and the other one from the British called Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher in particular had so much influence in the politics and economic direction of the whole world. To remember what basically her starting point was that there is no such a thing as the state. We must just recognize that we have individuals in competition with one another. The state must have no role other than ensuring that the masses prosper in a belief that once the economy by the market forces grows, it will eventually trickle down its benefits to ordinary people, and that's how you will begin to create jobs.
Trickle-down economics.
That powerful philosophy has what we now know as the Washington Consensus. And the Washington Consensus is basically Reaganism and Margaret Thatcherism. In South Africa, unfortunately, as soon as the RDP was sidelined effectively through the introduction of GEAR on the 4th of June in 1986, with President Thabo Mbeki then declaring...
1996.
1996, I'm sorry. What did I say?
86.
So, no, 1996 it was. He jokingly but very seriously told us that we must call him a Thatcherite. And he was right. The policy of gear is basically those inspired by Ronald Reagan. They're based on privatization, and the state must play no role in the economy. The markets must take over and regulate, including the industrialization in South Africa, make sure that you remove all of the tariffs as soon as possible. And as Trevor Manuel said at that moment, allow South Africa's companies to face the chilly winds of international competition. That chilly wings meant that you remove tariffs, you allow dumping by the China and other Asian sweat economies into South Africa. They destroyed our clothing, textile, manufacturing base, and they led to the dumping that you see in the streets of Johannesburg now, where even workers are selling goods with no stamp of origin, who are likely to have been moved into our economy fraudulently. Our corrupt borders by our corrupt officials who takes bribe to bring everything. You would have heard General Mkhwanazi saying that in Durban they have only capacity to check 10% of all goods that are. That chaos is what have led to the deindustrialization. If you look at our manufacturing sector, contribute to be shifted from the private into the shoulders of the people as a whole. But the profits from those investments are going to be privatized by the so-called markets. And indeed, the IPPs are now the risk from themselves, the people who are investing in the power generation, into ESCOM. And ESCOM then gets that money from us. We're now paying more than 500% in tariffs since the crisis of ESCOM started in 1997.
But I guess the question for me is, given that we had a left-leaning politics across such a wide part of our political spectrum at the time, and the ANC itself, as the governing party at the time, was in tripartite alliance with COSATU, with organizations that are left-leaning. Why did we not see a bigger pushback against Mbeki's Thatcherism, as you call it? Why did we not see trickle-down economics being pushed? Why have we lost that battle so significant, so that we now have a competitive economy that is now a competition for crumbs?
Firstly, the trade union movement has weakened in the process. Over the past 31 years, some point the trade union movement in South Africa represented around 40% of all workers in the economy, at the highest point on of the Marikana massacre. By 2008, that was the level of representation. It's now down to around 24%, 25%, 26%. So about 70% of all workers are no longer in the trade union movement.
And that doesn't even account for those who are not workers, given our 40% unemployment.
Absolutely. Then secondly, your powerful organs of people's power that existed in the 80s, 90s, your student movement, powerful SASCO, powerful Black Conscious and PAC aligned student movement, have been weakened and even argue have been corrupted by the tenders that starts to becoming a political theme at the level of tertiary
the patronage networks go deep.
Absolutely. Once you get your laptops, your iPad, and you are now determining who's going to win a tender at the level of university for everything, you are gone. You're gone. So the movement is gone. The youth movement was so powerful in institution, in partnership with the trade union, and therefore they formed such a powerful alliance of worker and student youth is gone. There's no youth movement in South Africa that inspires the whole lot of people. The solidarity that was there amongst black people and between workers, the marginalized poor majority, and the middle class has been weakened. It's now down to you are on your own, I'm on my own, everyone is on his own, and we are and then the fourth point is that society is drifting towards right, led by the middle class in society.
And I want us to pick up on that point as well. In a moment's time, we're going to take a few calls, because what you're describing here is a society that is demobilizing, disorganizing, and is getting caught up in value systems that are conservative. But how much of that has been a failure of leadership vis-a-vis, just a people giving up on the system? And I think it might be a bit of both. But let's take in a few callers as we continue the conversation here together in Vavi. We have Mikasana from Orlando West. Welcome to Power Perspective. Just give me a moment, Mikasana, so that we can make sure that Vavi can actually hear your question. But we are in conversation with Zwelinzima Vavi, who is the Secretary General of SAFTU? The General Secretary of SAFTU. Needed to get my nomenclature correct there. I was almost going to say Secretary General, which might lead into a very different organization. But we're in conversation about inequality in South Africa, and particularly the G20 report in light of South Africa's presidency of the G20, and of course our dubious honor of being the most unequal country in the world. You can join the conversation 861-987-000. Mkasana from Orlando West, welcome to Power Perspective.
Hi, Tessa and Mr. Vavi.
Welcome. Mr. Vavi, can hear you.
I can hear you very much.
Yeah, I think, Tessa, I think Mr. Vavi, he does not qualify to talk about all these things that he's talking about the ANC, because when COSATU became an alliance with the ANC, they knew very well that the ANC is controlled by the likes of Roland Cameron. He's speaking about Ronald Reagan. He's speaking about Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was very close to Roland Cameron. Ronald Reagan was also close to Roland Cameron. Oliver Tambo, the president of the ANC, was very close to Cameron. Even the ANC itself, he even bought houses for the ANC leaders. And Mr. Vavi know about that. He cannot tell us that he doesn't know the relationship between Cameron and the ANC, and it became the alliance with the ANC. So, Mr. Vavi, for me, all these things that he's saying, he does not qualify to say all those things, because he was in alliance with the ANC, and he knew all these things. What is the stance or the stance of the ANC? Why they were still in exile long before even they came to South Africa, but they became alliance with the ANC. So for me, Mr. Vavi, it's just, I don't know how to put it, but for me, I'm not taking people like Mr. Vavi.
Okay, Kasana from Orlando West.
You can respond if you want to respond.
No, I think you should respond.
I will respond.
But yeah, we're going to take one more call, Kasana, so you can listen to that response just after Michael from Vosloorus. Welcome to Power Perspective.
Good evening, Jessa.
Thank you very much, Put.
Look, Jessa, I heard the announcement that you made about America saying that or commit themselves to declarations, that G20 should not commit itself to declarations whilst it's sitting. It's strange that America don't want to be part of it, but they want to point out the direction that it must go.
Determine its outcomes while they abstain from it, yeah.
Yeah, they are absent, but they want to be present at the same time. So there's something that happened about 2 weeks ago with the lady, and the Americans put up a fuss about solidarity and all, and other words. I just can't remember those other words. They don't want the G20 to actually speak about that. I don't know if Mr. Vavi can expand on that and tell us what is this all about, that America does not want solidarity, because it seems since Donald Trump came into office, America has tried to isolate itself but play Big Brother over all other countries, directing like a choir conductor conducting a choir they don't sing, but they let you sing.
Yeah.
The last part is directly at Mr. Vavi. I come from the Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth part. You see, we've got many companies, motor companies there, and Mr. Vavi has been long in the trade union movement, and I want to say that in this part, ndiyakhweleta mntakaBhavi, ndiyakhweleta kakhulu ngoba uyawabona lamabhulu ukuthi enza ntoni. Afundisa abantwana babo bane-university abayakhileyo, bafundisa abantwana babo ukusebenza ngezandla. Nina nikhokhele imali zamalungu e-union zingena kuni, kodwa nina kuyo yonke le minyaka anikwazanga ukwenzela abantu abamnyama into efana naleya. Anikhweleti na nina ukuba nenzela abantu benu oku abantu abamhlophe benzela abantu babo kona. Cela ngiphendule kuloo ndawo.
Thank you so much there, Michael from Vosloorus. Vavi, your comments and in response to both of those.
Ndade Ngesana, first, thank you very much for listening tonight whilst I'm on the program. It means that you do take me very seriously. Anyone who can say that the General Secretary of Workers elected democratically by over 600,000 people shouldn't be taken seriously by society is living in his own world. And my invitation to my leader, Ngesana, please come to the real world where there's trade union movement. You may not like some leaders who are leading those unions because of the history that we are distorting, but please take us seriously that we are elected leaders of institutions, and we are leading those perfectly and without any problems. You can talk about the ones that you are leading, perhaps that are more important than the trade union movement.
But I think part of the point that he's making, though, and Vavi, is that the trade union movement were at the table during these times. And an important part is right. How do we respond to not only leaders within the ANC, but leaders within the broad liberation movement, trade unions, even civil society, who were around during that period in which we were starting to go to the right in terms of economic policy, but we did not hear the voices of dissent that would be forewarning to what those policies would lead to today.
No, there's been a massive battle since of 1996. I was the General Secretary of COSATU, luckily for the longest term, 15 years of service as a General Secretary, having been a Deputy General Secretary, organizer, Provincial Secretary, you name it all, I've been almost in every position. There was a battle when President Begi announced in 1996. I remember very vividly the first strike against 1 million job losses between 1997 and 1999 because of privatization and regulation happened.
The Durban strike.
No, it happened all over the country with millions participating on the 10th of May in 1999. Privatized. We lost the battle to protect Telkom. We now, as the government of South Africa, because of the numbers.
And people have called for that. There's been actual calls for a black AfriForum, a black solidarity, because those are seen
levels
as
of consciousness amongst our own leadership and our own members leaves much to be desired. NUMSA tried through its women's strike to get people to donate to the Mtata flood victims. People come to the party. I don't know what have happened to our society, honestly.
When you say you don't know what has happened to the society, as somebody who's been in leadership in the society for a long time, that's one of the reasons why I ask, are we where we are because of a failure of leadership in this regard? That it's one that we've seemed to have given into a compound, a democracy and a democratic order that just takes for granted that the economic situation and the economic policies that are there are insurmountable, and that we're not going to actually achieve anything by pushing back against them, and that we're going to lose these many battles, and that loss, those economic losses, have lost faith or have eroded the faith of people in democracy itself. Because
institutions of democracy.
Absolutely, because people are saying if democracy comes in handable, undefeatable, and that's all that democracy is going to deliver for us is rights in terms of political rights, but we're going to lose on the economic front from time to time, then continue to buy into the democracy. Why do you continue to then protect this idea of democracy in the Constitution if it comes hand in glove with these economic policies that are harming the majority of people? And then on the other hand, where is this movement of the people gone? And the leaders that have not fostered that movement need to take responsibility for that, sure, because it's the thing that has opened up the door, I think, for a more right-wing organizing of society, is that if we are going to fail to marry socialism and socialist ideas with real execution on the ground of real material conditions changing, then why are we surprised that people will go for more right-wing politics and more populist politics, even if they aren't in line with the Constitution and the values that we fought for?
The only hope I have against what you are saying is that the overwhelming majority of South Africans, after being disappointed by their primary liberation movement, the ANC, have demobilized themselves. Is not what we're anticipating. So that's the first point. But the second point is that there are very worrying developments in South Africa. Not only that 2/3 of the population, voting population, has given up, but the type of noises you hear, the growing conservatism, even among the black middle strata, the levels of hopelessness, the talk of this constitution is useless and we must ban it, the talk that the death penalty must come back, even the talk that Matanzima, Mpepu, Sebe, and Mangope were better than what is happening. To argue against these people because they tell you concrete things that have gone to the south when they were at the party. People are saying that openly now. People are saying that we were better otherwise in some aspect. So there's this massive depoliticization on the other end, the big bang.
Or repoliticization in a different direction, because we have lost trust in the political leaders who have been speaking this language of democracy, the Constitution, etc. What do we do with that political failure, that leadership failure in general amongst various elites in society who propagate democracy but fail people economically and socially?
There's Afrobarometer report, that's one point on the area we're covering, that says that 40% of South Africans a coup.
Yes.
Now, that's a level of our hopelessness, and people are losing hope because they've been betrayed. It's not disappointed. They've been betrayed. I mean, to have 31 years down the line, the 8% of the white population still occupying 70 to 72% of your land is the betrayal.
So what is to be done?
Okay, we must politicize the youth again. We must talk the politics, hopefully, of the left that they will associate with, not from the rhetoric. People don't eat beautiful words. We're going to hear beautiful declarations and statements when the leaders assemble here in South Africa, but we don't eat beautiful words. We want concrete programs that are going to turn the situation around, and the action at the local level. You cannot change the international situation unless you change the local. We must rebuild the trade unions, rebuild the civic associations, the youth, the students movement, the civil society, the women groups, to be powerful institutions that cannot be ignored by the government and the corporates in the country.
And I think that the question about how that mobilization and that organizing will happen still remains in a culture and in a space where we don't see a new leadership emerging, where we're not seeing that kind of grounded organizing emerging, where we're still looking to the old leaders, the old guard, the high-level conversations at the G20. But how are we going to foster that of renewal of society if we do not have a new cadre of leadership?
Absolutely. Today, SAFTU convened what we call a 10-a-side. 10 trade unionists, 10 strongest civil society formations, abahlali basemjondolo, the TAC, the Equal Education, the Union Against Hunger, the women organizations, to say how do we restart this mobilization from the ground up towards a broad working class summit that must now develop a program of action for mobilization of young people, uniting them with workers and the marginalized workers who are roaming the streets, unemployed and losing hope every day. Until we can put that program together and confront the status quo more powerfully as a united voice of the marginalized working class, we will fail, because currently the government is only listening to the one side, the side that is the moneyed class, and they don't care a damn about what are the small voices that will be marching around the
to what I heard you or saw you call today, the small noisy bunch, people who are promoting and organizing around those conservative values, the anti-migrants. They are listening to those organized voices in different ways.
My suspicion sometimes that some elements within government may be sponsoring those voices in order to divert attention away from their failures into chasing non-issues. The mistake that these small groupings mobilizing against migrants, the mistake they're making is that they are allowing the government to sit in the shadow, take no responsibility mess they have created, and whilst they are forcing us to chase lizards, whilst crocodiles are against us, as Mzwakambuli will say.
That is probably one of the most provocative statements I've heard in a while. Mr. Vavi will be able to stay with us just for 5 minutes after the news. I do have one more caller that wants to engage with you. And I do want us to wrap up the conversation in earnest properly, but I need to just take a break to go. Stay with us for about 5 minutes?
Fine.
Great stuff. Let's go to the news at 10 o'clock, and after that, we will wrap up our conversation with Zwelinzima Vavi, the General Secretary of SAFTU.
Power News. The top story is International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says the arrival of undocumented Palestinians in South Africa last week was suspicious, and the ANC has introduced stricter rules for selecting its candidates ahead of the 2026 local government elections. The Power News at 10. A very good evening. I'm Thabo Molakwani. We begin here. International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says the arrival of undocumented Palestinians last week was suspicious. He made this comment at a media briefing in Nasrec today ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit this weekend. Now, dozens of Palestinians arrived in the country in a chartered flight on Thursday without the correct immigration documents, sparking concerns about how they landed in South Africa. Some were later granted temporary 90-day visas while they decide what to do next. Lamola says an investigation into the matter is
as to whether there is some shady work and so forth. Indeed, we are suspicious as the South African government about the circumstances surrounding the arrival of the plane and the passengers that were in the plane. And this matter is a subject of investigation.
To the story now, the city of Ekurhuleni says bringing back Lebohile Tepa as the EPD spokesperson is a move to rebuild public trust in the Metro Police. Tepa was demoted last year after mishandling. Told Power 97 that the part of tightening accountability accountability and ensuring that EMPD communicates professionally and transparent.
We also stated that we have initiated a broader internal investigation which will enable us to track all the allegations that are arising from the Madlanga Commission. Following her testimony, there was an internal review in terms of what happened administratively. You will know that we have a new city manager, Mr. Kagiso Levutla. That process of disbandment was reviewed, and the decision was taken to reinstate the unit as it was part of the organizational structure and it plays a vital role in terms of transparency.
And former Western Cape head of detectives Jeremy Vavi is calling for a state of disaster to be declared in Cape Town as gang violence reaches alarming levels. Vavi's appeal comes as President Cyril Ramaphosa declined to declare a state of emergency in the Western Cape despite months of gang-related attacks. Now, more than 50 people have been killed in gang violence in just the past 2 months, raising fears that the situation is slipping beyond control of local law enforcement.
So we need a different think the way we do it out of the box here now, because the usual boxes and approaches and strategies don't work. Now, when I look at the Disaster Management Act, now I think most of us are used to it being used when there's a natural disaster or a natural occurrence like a flood. But one thing about the Act also talks about the human-caused occurrence of a disaster. And it actually, murder and criminal governance, and in the Western Cape, for example, criminal governance, besides the murder, we have things grabbing roads in their turf and then exact revenue from people who use it.
And finally, the ANC has introduced stricter rules for selecting its candidates ahead of the 2026 local government elections. Speaking at a briefing at Luthuli House today, the ANC's electoral committee said the revised guidelines are aimed at improving the performance of councillors. Now, under the new criteria, candidates must have the matric qualification or demonstrate clear capacity and experience to contribute effectively in the council. Here's Electoral Committee Chair Kgalema Motlanthe.
Mayoral candidates for the metros and the secondary cities shall be handled by the national officials. This is to ensure that they select people who bring expertise and the requisite qualification for those positions.
Let's recap your leading story in Power News at the SAWA. International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says the arrival of undocumented Palestinians in South Africa last week was suspicious. This as dozens of Palestinians arrived in the country in a chartered flight on Thursday without the correct immigration documents, sparking concerns about how they landed in the country.
Power News on FM, online, and DSTV channel 889. This is Power 90.7. And now, you're listening to Power Perspective with Tessa Dooms, Monday to Thursday, 8 p.m. to midnight. Taking your calls on 0861 987 000.
You're on Power Perspective this evening with your host, Tessa Dooms, and we are still in conversation with Zwelinzima Vavi, the General Secretary of SAFTU, as we reflect on inequality in South Africa. The G20, of course, having this inequality report that they have put out, but how do we stand as a country that is seen as the most unequal in the world, being the one frontlining the issue of inequality globally? How do we fix our house? Also try to make sure that there's an issue around global inequality that is also taken seriously at the G20 this coming week. Koto from Tembisa, thanks for waiting on the line. Welcome to Power Perspective. What's your question or comment to Mr. Vavi?
Tessa,
Yebo.
these people, the unionists, have become useless. They just dogs without teeth. Dogs without teeth. They were working effectively pre-1994. After 1994, people have lost jobs. Family men have lost jobs because of the unions. They're useless. They're just talking. There's nothing that they're doing. 31 years today, what have they done? They're now talking about this and that. I don't know. They're useless. Everything is gone. Everything.
Yeah.
Can you imagine 50-year-old man, he's a family man, he's working, he's a contract. No benefits, no nothing.
Yeah.
Huh?
And
What
Kudu, thanks so much for raising that sharply, and because it does link into the conversation that we were having just before we went into news. Koto from Tembisa. Mr. Vavi, about the ability of unions, of civil society, of political parties that are left-leaning and socialist to deliver. That is the fundamental thing that seems to be delegitimizing and discrediting people like yourself, people like the people in the social sector, in social justice movements, and in the unions. When Koto says that the unions are toothless, they are not delivering, they're not able to deliver, how do we start to respond to that, given the history? History is what it is. What is the way forward? How do you get unions to deliver?
People want concrete things. People don't eat history. People don't eat slogans and beautiful words. And I just want to emphasize that point again. People want to see concrete gains and improvements in their lives. And that's the statement that is being made by the caller from Tembisa. I just missed his name.
Koto, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. There's no doubt that the trade union movement has been weakened, have been fragmented, and has been divided by including the politics of the country, the politics of Ronald Reagan and Thatcher divided the trade union movement itself, and the civil society across is not what it used to be pre-1994. I don't want to debate that with anybody because it is true, and I know I've lived it. But whilst we're critical of the trade union, we must not, however, throw the baby with a bathwater. It is not altogether true that unions have done absolutely nothing over the past 31 years. I'm going to count and remind everybody. The trade union have transformed or helped to transform the South Africa's repressive, extremely exploitative labor market into a labor market where there are rights protected in the Constitution, in the Labor Relations Act, in the basic conditions of employment, in the occupational health and safety protections, the employment in the national minimum wage. You can't say those must be taken for granted because you are now used to them. Trade union movement have put pressure on the government. As a result, we have expanded the social grants from 3 million to 27 million today. We have old age people, better pensions, and that at least can support some households that are afflicted by unemployment. There's disability grants, there's child support grants, there's foster care grants. All we've scored many victories against e-tolls. We've scored many victories against e-tolls. We led that battle. And against corruption, we led that battle. And when we turned against the person that we once loved and hero-worshipped, President Jacob Zuma, and we led the battle that he go. So not true that we have been entirely used. But in the overall, unions have been weakened. There's no doubt about it.
And I guess as we wrap up this conversation, this unemployment or inequality report does paint a really bleak picture, and its recommendations are also quite high level. They're about setting up a task team, a global task team, a global panel to look at these things. But as G20, we know that these recommendations and declarations aren't binding, but if there was one or two things that you needed to see out of South Africa's leading of the G20 when it comes to inequality that will help us make this kind of tangible change, what would it be?
We will say adopt the Joseph Stiglitz report as the departure point. You want to tackle inequalities in the world and in each and every country, give us a roadmap in every country. South Africa can't just talk about inequalities when its policies are deepening inequalities inside its own borders. So that will be, to me, the biggest legacy of the presidency of Ramaphosa. Adopt a tangible action, appoint that high panel report that or institution that the panel led by Professor Stiglitz is calling for, and then every G20 must be about making progress in ensuring that we deal with the tax hole. We address illicit cash outflows. We address the criminality of the corporates who are mispricing and who are engaged in tax dodging schemes. Are we addressing the basic minimums in terms of the basic flaws of people to have some protections from the state, social security systems that are going to continue to narrow the gap between the haves and nots? What is our tax policy to make sure that the rich do fund the lower ranking members of society? In South Africa, for example, we know that 1% of the population is sitting on the wealth of 45% of the whole nation. And that 10% is sitting on the wealth of 90%. 90% of the wealth is in the hands of just 10% of the population. Unless we have concrete programs to reverse those trends, then these are going to be just summits.
Yeah, and we'll see where this takes us. Of course, there are many people who are saying that the G20 is just going to be another elite talk shop. And as you've said, they don't have a great track record. But I guess South Africa and last year Brazil, this year South Africa, it seems that the BRICS nations have an opportunity to push in a different direction. Let's see how much they take up concretely. And this for laying that out and being willing to traverse widely some conversations about the state of South Africa and the South African left as well. That's Zwelinzima Vavi, who is the General Secretary of SAFTU. Thank you for joining us for more than an hour this evening. It seems that we're going to need more time to discuss these issues in future, but thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Power 98.7. Now, Power Business with Tahila Nisilo.
We're speaking to His Excellency, the French Ambassador to South Africa, David Martinon. Let's talk about how the pullout by states has impacted this. Do you believe that it's a significant dampener on the G20?
So obviously the absence of the US is unusual. We knew from the beginning, and notably from the first Sherpa meeting back in, I think it was in January, that the intention of the new administration was to kind of streamline the agenda of the G20. But whatever happens with the American participation, we are working to have a fruitful discussion in Johannesburg, even without them.
Power Business, Monday to Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. From the global stage to our backyard, for the first time in history, the world's most powerful economies gather on African soil. The G20 Summit, under the theme Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainability, will be hosted right here in Johannesburg, South Africa. From climate change to trade, digital transformation to global equity, the decisions made here will shape the future of our continent and the world. Join Power 987 on the 20 22nd to the 23rd of November 2025, as we bring you the conversations and unpack what the G20 means for Africa and for you. Hashtag Power987G20. Now we're talking. New conversations on Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
19 minutes past 10, you're still on Power Perspective this evening with your host, Tessa Dooms. Our newsmaker slot going a little bit longer than expected this evening. We head straight into our next set of conversations in the 10 o'clock hour. In a few moments' time, we'll be speaking to Professor Alex van der Heever about the Auditor General's new powers, new shiny powers, in order to hold municipal managers directly accountable for their management and losses under their tenure. We'll have that conversation in does this empower the AG more, and will this help get a handle on mismanagement and corruption within local government? Then after the 10:30 hour, within the 10:30 hour slot, we are going to also do a peek into the Madlanga Commission. The 120 dockets are now also forefronted in terms of the Madlanga Commission, but of course also some of the outcomes from last week, looking at what happened in Ekurhuleni. A lot has come out in the last few days, so we'll speak to political analyst Musa Mdenge as well before we get to 11 o'clock. A lot to cover. Let's get into it.
Power Perspective with Tessa Dooms, 8 p.m. to midnight.
On the line with us, Professor Alex van der Heever, probably one of my favorite academics in South Africa as well, joining us this evening. Thank you so much for your patience this evening with us, Prof, as we've kind of gone off schedule a little bit, but thank you and welcome to Power Perspective.
No, my pleasure. Good evening.
Good evening. And as we look into this story that has emerged around the AG, new shiny powers, I don't know how new they are, but certainly their enforcement is new to us, trying to understand how the AG can use this certificate of debt to force municipal managers to pay back losses. Firstly, where does this power stem from, and what is it trying to solve for?
Well, it's part of the legislative framework that has been extended to allow for remedial action to be required. In the case of, in any instance where there is due process involved, and that they do request that the relevant people, the accounting officers, actually take action to address the particular issue that they've noted. And if they don't take action, then they move into this mode. And in this particular case, they've penalized the person in requiring that incurred. But I'm not sure that this is necessarily such good news because we actually already have extensive in the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act and Anti-Corruption Act and various others, which allow for real action to be taken against people, not only civil action, but criminal action against accounting officers who fail to do their job. And no action is taken in terms of that legislation.
Dr. van der Heever, or Professor van der Heever, the idea that municipal managers are the oversight lies with them, for me, skips over a few things. One is the politicization of the state and the extent to which politicians bear down on bureaucrats. So when I think about this as, a mechanism for use both corruption and mismanagement, is it directed at the right layer of our system? Are municipal managers the best place for us to try and exert this level of accountability?
Yeah, so there are accountable measures that can be taken against the executive authorities as well. In other words, your members of the executive, your MECs, of municipal councils as well as ministers. So all of them are actually responsible in many cases. So it is a question as to whether or not it's it's still appropriate, because in many cases you've got an official who should be acting in terms of the legal framework and protecting public monies. And if they are browbeaten into doing something improper, then they are accountable. But the problem is that in many cases what's happened is that there is a conflict of interest, member of the executive, whichever tier of government you're looking at, and the people that are appointed. They can appoint their own team. And the problem is they're in a very powerful position to appoint everybody on every side of any accountability structure that sits in a administration or in any kind of public entity, and you essentially make it inert. You stop it from holding anybody to account, and then your parliaments don't hold anybody to account, your anybody to account, and your public officials are basically given cover when they commit improper acts. So if you have to look at quite a lot of provincial departments and national departments, as well as municipal major metros, they are serial offenders in terms of irregular expenditure and unauthorized expenditure, and serial non-compliance with the Public Finance and Municipal Finance Management Act. And that requires, can involve, if it's willful or a result of gross negligence, that there is both disciplinary measures that should be taken as well as happening.
Right.
And it's because of these conflicts.
One mechanism that bypasses those political networks and those accountability, and the AG using the powers that she does have to do this. But let's look at the case that's before us now with Alan Losaba now being held personally liable as a municipal manager to pay a debt within 30 days. Now I've been served this certificate of debt. What are the real steps that follow if in the 30 days that debt repayment is not made? Does this then lead to an accountability that says that you can be fired, that you can be held criminally liable? What does this open the door to from the side of the AG that may have been closed off by political gatekeeping and insulating from accountability?
Well, essentially, as far as I understand, they're requiring that that action be taken against this individual, and if that action is not taken, then they can escalate. But it's not entirely clear that people can't evade this completely. Right. But it is, and what I'll raise as a concern is that for many years, the Auditor General has been in a position where nobody's really interfered with their independence, because all they've been doing is providing transparency. Right. And because there's no accountability, they're kind of left alone, because transparency on its own wasn't sufficient. Yeah. But the moment you start to allow them to take this kind of action, the question is there going to be pushback, and how long is it going to take before the Auditor General is no longer independent? And this is part of the problem, is all of those other structures that we have that are meant to have teeth have pretty much been blunted, because they have real authority. I mean, most of the municipal authorities, most of their accounting officers would be in jail today. And at a provincial level as well. We look at all of this happening throughout government and nobody being held to account. So they've essentially, the legislative framework has been nullified. So the question is whether or not this is actually going to be really effective. First of all, it came in around about 2019, I think it was, and this is the first time they're actually activating it. Yeah. And it's a pinprick. They haven't targeted any big fish. They've targeted a small fish. Despite the fact that if you go through the auditor reports, you can throw it.
There are bigger fish that they could have started to fry.
And you really big, very big. You can start at the city of Johannesburg. The provincial government of Gauteng, the Eastern Cape, the Department of Health in Northern Cape. I mean, their financial position is catastrophic and inexplicable in the absence of the systemic corruption. and yet nothing is happening there. So yeah, you can go anywhere. So this is the concern, is that we effectively, it would be more actually work and to work out what is actually stopping it from operating.
Dr. Van Heever, as you mentioned that, going for the bigger fish, you would think that what the AG is doing here is a test case, number one, to see where, what the responses are to this, how the system responds to this, how the politics responds to this, how the public responds to this. But does this test case, because this is a municipal manager that we're talking about, in the city of Joburg, you would have a number of different high-ranking officials, for example, in the different entities that would have similar levels of decision-making municipal managers would have. So when I think about the city of Joburg, you have a municipal manager, I think it's now Floyd Brink once again. But if you talk about the Joburg Property Company, Helen Boertes has come under a lot of scrutiny when it's come to the decision-making and tenders in that role as heading up. Would this kind of certificate of debt be able to be applied to somebody at that level that Helen Boertes sits at, rather than only the municipal manager in the case of the city of Joburg?
So it should be applied to somebody who's an accounting officer. That would be who's basically responsible for, let's say in a position, has the authority to manage these particular issues effectively. In other words, to prevent manage the procurement process effectively, not allow overpricing, systematic, obvious, glaring overpricing from occurring. You also have to be able to collect revenue, etc. People in that position can be held accountable. So yes, they could look at that where they've got a loss. Those particular people would be important. Now, what Joburg has done, created all of these public entities. And in these public entities, there are separate boards, and they've appointed effectively accounting officers within them. So you've got City Power, you've got Joburg Water, Pick It Up, etc. And all of these structures, there's a loss of visibility around them. And theoretically, you can target every one of them along these lines.
Okay.
If you go into them, the City Power, it's important to note that municipalities can't also budget for deficits, because they're meant to essentially budget from the revenue that they're going to collect. And if you fake your budget for revenue, you're essentially in non-compliance with the Municipal Finance Management Act. But that's exactly what's happening. Many of these public entities, it's hidden, it's below the visibility of the municipality itself, and their actual expenditure is not actually revealed to the public. You've got to extract that information separately. So when it's leaked, as it has been, to News 24, you get a sense of what's really going on. They're budgeting 23 billion rand in revenue at City Power, but they're only getting 19 billion rand in actual revenue, but you never see the actuals. So that's a case where it's these kinds of things that can also result in them being held to account, both in terms of the AXA, but also the Municipal Finance Management. So these are issues that expose these officials massively. The only issue is very little has happened to them today.
And now that we do have this test case on the table, effectively it gives us the opportunity to see if it will make a difference to these accounting officers at all, whether they'll just shrug it off, and whether there'll be any kind of political cover that comes in and intervenes on them. Again, Prof, if nothing happens, and we've seen so many instances where there is attempted accountability, but nothing happens. If nothing happens, what is the next step here? Is there any kind of recourse, or does this just mean that we have yet another failed attempt at accountability?
Well, I think we'll have to, let's say the jury's out on whether or not it will succeed as having a systemic effect on accountability. So what you would hope is that in this particular instance, it will make the senior officials who are responsible to allow this stuff to happen, allowing themselves to be browbeaten by the politicians or who are corrupt themselves. This exposes them, and it means that their cover is gone. If they feel that cover is gone, then they basically don't follow orders. Now, the question is whether that's the effect here. I'm not sure it is enough.
Because there's also the issue of whether or not these municipal accounting officers would even have the ability to pay back these debts. And I mean, here we're talking about, in the case of Alan Lubasa, 4.6 million that is required in 30 days. One would assume that a municipal accounting officer doesn't just have 4.6 million laying around. So again, it may seem like it's a theoretical exercise rather than a real one, if we think about the fact that they may actually just not have this money, and if they don't, it doesn't seem like there's a clear next step.
Yeah, so there is an issue about they might collect what they can, and that might do severe damage to those individuals. The other is that they may merely be trying to leverage an actual behavioral change and not really be chasing the money. If that's the case, it's probably not going to be sufficiently systemic effect throughout the system. But I guess they're trying to see what happened. What would really make them behavior change is putting them in jail and taking their assets, because you can do both. And at the level of the officials, but also get them to reveal what they were part of. So in many cases, the cover is provided at the political level, so accountability is closed down. But what you want to do at the end of the day is to have officials that are appointed into these positions sufficiently scared of the accountability framework such that they decline participating in this behavior and this misconduct. However, the problem is that that's in many cases why they've been appointed. They've been appointed to foster this. And so the problem is it's a collusive framework when the politicians are in a position to appoint these people. And if basically the whole idea is systems of extraction, then it's far deeper. You're not going to hit this with a kind of pinprick effect through the Auditor General's office. You've got to apply the full weight of the legal frameworks on people. But the key thing that has to be eliminated is this ability to appoint people, have political appointments into the system. Once you have that, you see it with Donald Trump. You see what happens. You can completely dissemble a government system in relatively short order by taking out the top structures rapidly. Yeah. So you have state capture happening